Hey, what's going on, everybody? I'm Michael Lingenfelter, and I'm here with the Aging Athlete Guide, which is a show on how to get the most out of yourself so you can get the most out of what you love to do. I'm here to bring you the experts to share their knowledge and insights and stories to keep you moving without the worries of slowing down due to age. And today we are joined by Pat Byrne. Pat is a expert on sleep, and he began his journey in the sleep and fatigue field in 2005. His goal was to prevent fatigue-related accidents because he had a young nephew that had fallen asleep behind the wheel after working long hours and drove his car off a cliff and unfortunately died. Patrick has combined Army and Air Force mission planning software with actigraphy to create the first FDA-approved sleep and fatigue monitor to prevent such accidents. The fatigue management system he developed are now used globally by many organizations, including Caterpillar, Rio, most U.S. airlines and railroads and militaries in the Western world. My favorite thing is that he works with professional sports in North America and Australia. He's consulted with teams like in the NHL, NBA, MLB, MLS, NFL, NCAA, AFL, and the National Olympic team. And currently, he maintains a sport and industry sleep and fatigue management business and is completing a book entitled Inconvenient Sleep, which goes into why teams win and lose. So that is super, super fascinating stuff. This book was co-authored by Suzanne Byrne, JD, a sports law graduate from Tulane University Law School and former senior managing editor of the Sports Lawyers Journal. So welcome to the show, Pat.
Michael, good to hear from you.
Thank you. Technology barring us to get on this earlier. We fought through it and we are on the show now. So I'm so excited to have you here because sleep is we're learning is a bigger and bigger thing when it comes to improvement, not only in the sports arena, but with work and everyday life. So I'm bringing you in here and excited to filter through some of the truths and some of the myths out there. So let's just start there. I'm sure there's a lot of bad and good research that's out there in the world. What are some things that may be misleading in the bad research that's out there that's received a lot of a hype? And then on the flip side, what is some of the better research showing?
That's a great question, Michael. I think, we could do an entire podcast just on that question. One of the things I like to do when I talk to my clients is kind of take a step back a little bit, because most of what we know about sleep and fatigue, we know in the last couple decades. So just kind of put this in perspective, X-rays, which everyone knows about and probably most athletes have used, were used in sports as early as 1895.
Oh, wow.
And we know from most of our high school that the entire structure of DNA was developed in 1953 by Watson and Crick, and there's a whole books and movies written about that. But what people don't know is that sleep research didn't even start till after both of those things had happened. So sleep research didn't even start until late 1953 and really didn't take off until the 70s and 80s. It's hard to pick up a magazine or newspaper or listen to a radio or television show that doesn't talk about sleep anymore, but it's all very new and quite frankly can be very confusing. And so there are really kind of three areas of research that people need to pay attention to. One is the whole technology around measuring sleep. The other is about how sleep affects performance. And the other is all of these potions and gadgets that are out there to supposedly help you with your sleep. So maybe I can kind of go through each one of those. So measuring sleep is relatively easy if you have the right technology. So sleep is measured by brain waves. And this goes back, again to the 1950s, but they put electrodes on your brain and they can tell from your brain waves whether you're asleep or whether you're awake.
Okay.
And what grew up with that technology in the late 1970s was actigraphy, sleep watch technology that we see, all over the place today. And it was developed by a gentleman named, a doctor actually, Daniel Kripke at University of California in San Diego. And so he developed the very first actigraphy, which was to try, and what he did was he figured out that certain motions on your wrist, are comparable to whether you're awake or whether you're asleep.
Oh, wow.
And so he created what's called the Cole-Kripke algorithm with a mathematical formula that converts wrist motion into sleep. And he made that open source, and is basically that algorithm is used by every sleep watch in the world now.
Wow.
Even though it was developed in, into the 70s. And so that's the part of the problem with some of that technology is that it hasn't been tested. So there are two kinds of sleep watches, and we may get into this a bit later, but there are what's called medical grade technology and consumer grade technology. And so the medical grade sleep watches, so that they look like your Fitbit that you wear, but what they've done is they've been tested against brain waves. So in other words, they put these watches on large numbers of people that sleep overnight, having their brain waves tested, so they can tell precisely when they're awake and when they're asleep. And so then they compare that what the watch predicts, and the medical grade technology is around 95% accurate in predicting when you're awake and when you're asleep.
Wow.
The consumer grade technology, which all of these things from Fitbit and Apple Watch and Oura Ring and all of these other things that have popped up, have not been tested properly against brainwave technology.
Got it.
Right. So they use the same hardware, but they haven't really validated it against the what's called polysomnography or the brainwave technology. So what you get out of that is hit and miss. And so people need to sort of pay a bit attention to that, and we can talk a bit more about that. The other research, and a lot of it came out of the U.S. military, is how sleep affects performance.
Okay.
And what they mean by performance is reaction time.
Okay.
And so what was developed in the 60s and 70s was a little instrument, looks like a little Game Boy box with a random light that shows up, and you hit a button and you react to it. So it measures your reaction time and your ability to concentrate, to pay attention to that. And it's called a PVT, or psychomotor vigilance task. It doesn't matter. But what they've done is compared your reaction time to your sleep patterns. So they can tell when you're not sleeping well that you have a really bad reaction time. There's some really great research around that. So there's, if anybody's, worried or thinking about that, if the difference between 5 and 7 hours of sleep is astronomical in terms of change in reaction time.
Yeah, especially if you are a high performing athlete, when you have to make decisions in milliseconds. My first thought goes to like a baseball player that, you've got to calculate so many things in an instant and get the spin of the ball, the speed of the ball, put your bat on the ball, and just nanoseconds being off can impact your performance big time. So I can see how that can be massively important.
In fact, it's important probably in every sport. Even in hockey, we have the goalies, right? Get a 100-mile-an-hour puck coming at them. They don't have very long to react to it.
Yeah.
Right? And so sleep has a direct, and it's great research done at Washington State University and Walter Reed and others, where they can really show that how long you sleep and how well you sleep directly impacts your reaction time.
Got it.
Okay. And the third area are really, in terms of research, are really all of these just potions and technology that are sort of popped up because people are, concerned about sleep. So there's things like melatonin and tart cherry juice and all of these supplements that purport that if you take them, you'll fall asleep faster.
Okay.
Right. Virtually all of that is, quite frankly, fraudulent. And I'll tell you why. Because you can't actually measure how fast you fall asleep. It's impossible, right? You can measure when people fall asleep, right? You can do that with brainwave technology. You can do it with sleep watches. You can tell when people fall asleep. But when do they start to fall asleep? right? I mean, if you get up at 8 in the morning and you fall asleep at 8 at night, then it's taking you 12 hours to fall asleep.
Yeah.
But what these companies have done is created these artificial starting points.
And how are they going about validating or marketing, if they're saying you're going to fall asleep faster, what are they putting behind that as far as what are they standing on to say that?
What they do is they create an artificial starting point.
Mm-hmm.
And so in polysomnography, so if you go for a sleep lab study, what they do is they hook all the electrodes onto your brain to measure your brain waves, right? And get you into a bed. And once you're all in there settled, they turn the lights off. That's the starting point. And then when you fall asleep, they say, okay, that's how long it took you to fall asleep. So it's a really artificial starting point. So if you want to prove that your cherry juice or some other potion makes you fall asleep faster, right? You just get them into, you can manipulate when you turn the lights off.
Got it.
So, and most of that technology and most of those systems really only claim to help you fall asleep 5 or 10 minutes faster. So my view is don't waste your time and money on it, because even if they work, falling asleep 5 or 10 minutes faster isn't worth the aggravation, isn't worth the money, and isn't worth some of the negative effects of some of this stuff.
Yeah, just get to bed 5 or 10 minutes earlier. Seems like that would be the common knowledge. Yeah. So I love that, having these 3 areas of your measurement, your performance, and then all the potions and things that are promising to help you out there. So going back to the measuring, I'm not going to allow my fiance to listen to this, because she's been, I think, waiting for this interview, because she gives me a bad time, because I'm the person who had the app on my phone that listens to me moving around in bed and tells me exactly the percentage of sleep I got. And she was like, well, that sounds silly. It doesn't seem like it doesn't seem like there's any validity behind it. And I'm like, no, it makes sense. Don't you see it? And so once I started diving into this, I was like, I might have to take a few steps back. So something listening to just me moving around, if we're saying that you can't wear technology that's going to help you necessarily, consumer grade technology, there's probably not a good chance that I could download an app on my phone that's going to do a very good job of that.
You're right about that. The apps are garbage. And I mean, I say that they look wonderful. They create great bling. Right? Mm-hmm. I mean, they've dressed up the pig in a really great way. But, and what you need to do is look at the technologies, go to their website and look at what's called validation studies. Where have they put their technology against brainwave technology, and to compare the two. Right? If they haven't done that, you're wasting your time.
Got it. All right. Well, I deleted the app a few days before I decided to give you a call, so I'm ahead of it. And so when we talk about getting, wanting to improve our sleep, is there a ideal amount or quantity of sleep that we should be shooting for or aiming for?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I mean, I think there's a lot of human variability around what's a good amount of sleep to get. Okay. And the question is, if I get 5 hours or I get 7 hours or I get 9 hours, how does that affect your life? First of all, right? And so what they normally recommend is anywhere from sort of 7.5 to 9.5 hours of sleep for people, which is a pretty big window. Okay. But it really depends on how well you want to perform. So if you're an athlete and you want to maximize your reaction time, you need to maximize your sleep. So that might be for you, for most people, that's around 8 hours. Most of the studies show that if you're getting 8 hours of sleep consistently, that you can maximize your reaction time.
And does it matter at what time of night you're falling asleep and what time of day you're waking up, or is that a variability from person to person as well?
It varies person to person. The timing of your sleep does matter, because nighttime sleep is way better than daytime sleep.
Got it.
But there are also normal changes in humans. For example, there are humans that are what we call are owls, that are people that naturally stay up late and sleep in, and people that naturally go to bed early and get up early. They're called larks.
Okay.
Right. But that's a difference of a couple of hours in our circadian rhythms. That doesn't really. That's different than. It's not like staying up all night.
Got it. Got it. And so when I heard 7.5 to 9 hours, is that my thought goes to just hearing before that a cycle? Is there a cycle of sleep take an hour and a half? Can you talk to me a little bit about the cycles of sleep and how we get through that?
Sure. And so, yeah, one of the things that they discovered in the early 1950s was these exactly sleep cycles.
Mm-hmm.
So, which mean your brain waves change during the night. And so what happens is, and they do come in up for the most part in sort of idealized at 90 minutes. So you get into you get into a light sleep, you fall asleep, and you get into a deeper sleep, right? And then you come back out of that deep sleep into the very top, where you get into what's called REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, and that's where you dream, right? And it's usually only 10 or so minutes at a time. And that the discovery of REM sleep actually revolutionized all of sleep science. Because what happens is in REM sleep is your brain waves look exactly like the brain waves when you're awake, not when you're asleep. And it confused the heck out of the researchers for a very long time. They didn't know what was going on. And what happens when you dream is your body freezes. Right? So a lot of the night you'll roll around, in your sleep and do whatever, but when you start to dream, your body actually freezes.
Is that a chemical that's being released in your own
No.
body? Oh, okay.
It is. There's basically within your brain it just shuts off the ability to move around. I mean, where that's broken in people, it's called REM sleep disorder, and people act out their dreams and thrash around and hurt people and hurt themselves, right? It's a sleep disorder. But so that's the kind of sort of 90-minute cycle you go through. But what people don't realize is that the REM sleep is actually back-ended. So you start out with having a lot more deep sleep to begin with, and it's not till you get into the 6, 7, 8 hours of sleep that you start getting a lot more REM sleep.
Got it. And is that consistent? Is it going to change if I wake up in the middle of the night and then go back to sleep?
It's interesting. It depends on the person. I kind of look at these sleep studies, and it's kind of like a game of snakes and ladders. And if you remember that game where you go along and then you drop down and you pop up again.
Yeah.
And so there's a bit more, even though these cycles are idealized, there's a lot more randomness to it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And are the ones on the back end more important than, or more? Yeah. Is there more importance of getting to the final stages? Are those, what is different about those final stages than the ones in the beginning?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm not sure science has an answer to that. There's technology and systems out there that try to get you to increase your deep sleep versus your REM sleep.
Okay.
And the analogy that I use is, what do you like better, your heart or your lungs? Right? I mean, they're both important, and your brain decides, depending on how tired you are, the brain decides what sleep cycle they're going to put you in.
Got it.
And so I completely discourage people from trying to manipulate their brain around sleep. Let their brain do what it needs to do. Right? Don't get into these technologies that say, if you wear this headband and then we're going to wake you up in deep sleep and put some music on and increase your deep sleep cycle and reduce your REM cycle. Saying, what are you messing with? You don't even know what you're messing with here.
Yeah.
I think our brains are way smarter than humans. The brain knows what it's doing.
That seems like it's very interesting, the pattern that we've taken as humans with technology to almost get away from being in touch with our own systems and saying, do I wake up feeling good? Do I wake up feeling tired? And I fell into that trap, looking at my phone and being like, well, it said I got 58%, so I must be tired. And so we get away from using this amazing system, our brain, and being in touch with that and relying on technology that's not based in much validity a lot of the time.
Right. And actually, you raise a very, very interesting point here, which I see a lot with professional athletes, because it's been sort of drilled into their minds that sleep is so important, and they actually create a lot of anxiety around it. And a lot of this consumer technology has actually created more sleep problems and more anxiety amongst athletes than it needs to. And so, I mean, what I say to athletes is, and I try to use this analogy of a bathroom scale. So if you wake up one day and decide you're going to lose weight because you weigh 380 pounds, and you go stand on your bathroom scale and it says, 380 pounds, you can do that every morning. And it doesn't change anything. Bathroom scales don't tell you why you're fat. Bathroom scales don't tell you how to reduce your weight. They don't do anything, right? And that's exactly the same with sleep watches.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great analogy.
They don't tell you why you're not sleeping well. Right? They don't help you get to sleep better, right? So it's basically like standing on a weight scale when you're fat every day. It doesn't help.
That's great. And so when we think about now looking at what are the things that can cause us that are not allowing us to get the proper amount of sleep, I'm sure there's different components that some of it are genetic, some of them are environment. Tell me a little bit about the different avenues and areas that all contribute to that.
Yeah, great question. I think, and because that's one of the really important areas we actually talk about in our book, and I emphasize a lot with the professional athletes we deal with, is you need to diagnose what's going on with your sleep. So if you think you're only sleeping or you're not sleeping enough, you need to, don't run out and grab some solution before you know what the problem is. And so you can get, and I should back up a little bit. So one of the things I say is that poor sleep is not a disease. Poor sleep is a symptom. Okay. And it's a symptom of a sleep disorder. And there are about 90 different sleep disorders, everything from sleep apnea to restless leg syndrome. And they're depending on the sport, they're highly prevalent. Right. And so people often run around and beat themselves up because they can't sleep well when they may in fact have an undiagnosed sleep disorder. The other is mental health, which is a huge problem in professional sports. And so, we say you can't have a conversation about mental health without talking about sleep, and you can't talk about sleep without talking about mental health, because they're intertwined. And then there's what's called organic diseases, things like diabetes and others that affect your sleep. Then there's also medications. Okay. So whether you're on over-the-counter stuff or prescription or recreational, they all affect sleep. And then there's also your lifestyle, right? Whether you stay up and watch movies, or whether you can only afford a house that's 50 miles from your work, and so you're commuting 3 hours a day, right? And so there are choices that people make, and then of course there are choices, if you're a professional athlete, that your team and league make about your travel and others. So trying to sit down with a professional athlete and try to diagnose what specifically is going on with them to try to fix their sleep problem is like peeling back an onion, right? It's not a simple solution. I'm working with some high level Major League Baseball pitchers right now. And that's one of the issues. We know they're not sleeping well. They know they're not sleeping well. And you try to, take one step at a time and try to sort out, why is this? Right? But people tend to do is to jump to conclusions. Just give me something to take and I'll be good.
This is fascinating, because this goes hand in hand. What I see day in and day out is a treating of symptoms. I mean, I have people that come into me with pain, tightness, a lot of times muscle soreness, and these things are indicators of, hey, there's issues going on in the body that are potentially causing these to be either chronic or coming up over and over again. But we are fighting this battle of these companies that market to the symptom to alleviate it temporarily or to bring attention to it. So it's very fascinating when I hear that poor sleep is just a symptom of a handful of other things that you really have to, like you said, start uncovering or unlayering the onion.
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely.
So what I notice a lot, and I'm not only just athletes, but your day-to-day person that is working 40 hours a week and then wanting to play at the end of their week as well, is they'll sacrifice, let's say a couple hours of sleep and typically get maybe 6 hours of sleep versus the 7.5 to 9. What is that person that's getting 6 on a constant basis going to be missing or sacrificing by giving that up?
Yeah, well, you're sacrificing reaction time to begin with, sacrificing the ability to concentrate and to learn.
Okay.
I mean, one of the things we work with, particularly in the National Football League with players, is they have to learn 50 new plays a week. Right? They need to focus. They need to be they need to concentrate on that. And there's tons of really good studies that show that the less you sleep, the harder it is to learn. And in fact, there's a great study out of the Great Lakes Naval Academy, a 4-year study where they showed that sleep difference between 6 and 8 hours of sleep is a difference between 11% on standardized tests.
Wow,
it's huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So after writing this book, I feel like the next thing we're going to go after is, why are we putting kids in school at 7:30 a.m. in the morning? Isn't that seem like they need more sleep and it's going to interfere with their learning?
Absolutely. And I think that's a controversial area. And I'll tell you why is, in theory, if you give them the right opportunity to sleep, you hope they take it. Right. Mm-hmm. And kids, they're adolescents, and adolescents have the kind of circadian rhythm where they naturally stay up late and sleep in the morning. That's part of their and it often doesn't switch over till they're 24, 25. And so, that people, whether the schools need to be cognizant of it, but also I work with professional athletes that are 18, 19 years old. Right. And the teams will get them in there for 7 o'clock in the morning meetings and go, why? What's so like you got all day? What's your hurry? Right. Well, we've always done it this way. Right. And so that's part of that whole problem. And one of the coaches I used to work with, he coached like 4 different National Hockey League teams. And I used to say to him, look, we had our team flying from Vancouver to New York, for example. And I say, you know what? We can't fly right back after the game. These guys need to get some sleep. And he goes, we can't stay in New York because the guys will just go out and party. Right. And I understand that. And that's part of the other side, the flip side of the argument around schools as well. And what I said to him was, look, there's only one winning strategy, and that is to stay over and educate the players about why they need to get sleep.
Yeah.
Because if you come home, if you want to come home right after the game, they're going to be sleep deprived and they're not going to be able to function properly all the time. So at least give yourself a chance to succeed.
Yeah. So in theory, it makes sense. It's just in practice, can we make it happen? Or give them the opportunity to make that happen.
Right. And part of it is education and feedback.
And like you said, it's such a new science in itself that it's just a matter of when and how that information is going to come. And so when you say you have a couple days back to back where you're not getting your ideal amount of sleep, is there a way to catch up by getting more sleep the next day? How does that work?
Yes and no. So it's not a 1-for-1 trade. So if you stayed up all night, so you missed 8 hours of sleep, you can't make that up in 2 or 3 days. If you call making it up in terms of normalizing your reaction time, it takes from 5 to 7 days.
Oh wow!
To catch up on your reaction time. So yeah, it takes a long time, and a lot the that's why we talked earlier about some of the software that the airlines use. The U.S. Air Force and U.S. Army created software that actually predicts quite well these kinds of things. And so what we do with teams is we actually put their schedule and their sleep patterns into it, and we can tell them how long it's going to take them to recover.
Got it. So from a handicapping standpoint, I would want to know what teams and how well they're sleeping before I make a decision. I might find an edge there.
Yeah, but you're right. We when I worked with the Vancouver Canucks starting in 1998, they had, being on the West Coast, traveling to East Coast is terrible, right? And it's much harder than flying the other way. And we did a whole pile of things that we were able to increase the sleep opportunity for the players. And we spent a lot of time training the players and talking to them about it and tracking their sleep and getting them to buy in. And it made a huge difference. It was literally within 2 years, they won back-to-back what's called President's Trophies in the National Hockey League, which means they had the highest number of points. And they won more road games in those back-to-back games than they'd ever done in their history.
Wow.
And it's not magic.
Mm-hmm.
It's using logic, right? And maximizing the opportunities for sleep, right? And we went to the league, and they would have back-to-back games in Florida, and then one day rest and fly back to Vancouver for a game. And they would always lose those games in Vancouver, and we're going, yeah, duh, their reaction time's down about 20%.
Yeah.
And so we were able to go through with the league and with the team for the entire season and look at their schedule and say, how can we provide opportunities for the players to get better sleep, and how can we go back to the league and say, don't do this to us anymore?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, I work with Major League Baseball team where a West Coast team where what happens in Major League Baseball is that if you fly from the West Coast to the East Coast, they give you a day off to deal with the fatigue. But what the league was doing was using that day off to make up rainout games on the East Coast. And so it completely negated the whole thing. And so what I said to the teams, go back to the league and say, don't do that to us. Like, that's there for a reason, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like there's been positive progress in the awareness of professional teams and within the organizations to get an understanding of this and make changes to allow them to have a more of an advantage when they are traveling and not have their performance time be negatively impacted.
You're right. It's slow. There are teams that have bought into it, teams that don't buy into it, teams that come in and out of it. The analogy that we use in our book is with strength and conditioning, for example. Strength and conditioning in the 80s was completely unheard of. Mm-hmm. Like, nobody was doing strength and conditioning until this group out of Nebraska, University of Nebraska, and their football team started doing strength and conditioning. And everybody else bought into it, but it was like a 20 or 30 year evolution to get where it is today. And now that's kind of built into their DNA. But sleep and sleep research and how sleep applies to sports is back where strength and conditioning was in the 1980s.
Got it.
Like, they're just learning.
Mm-hmm. And so that's fascinating that, hopefully it's going to benefit the teams that get on it quicker, which it seems to have done, which you telling me some of the teams you've worked with and the response and results you've seen with that. Go ahead.
No. Yeah.
My question for you, my curiosity goes with kids when they're younger versus athletes or people as they're older. I even noticed myself that it is much harder to stay asleep longer like I used to, even on the weekends. My brain's waking me up at 5 a.m., whether I'm choosing to or not. And why does that happen as you get older?
Yeah, great question. So we talked earlier about all of the various ways that the things that can affect your sleep.
Yeah.
Right? Sleep disorders and mental health and all that sort of business. One of the things I didn't talk about was age. Okay. And I've worked with a whole pile of coaches, but one of the ones I like and work with was Pete Carroll with the Seahawks. And one of the things that he says, and most coaches say, is you have to play the cards you're dealt with. Right. And so, I'm 66 and I'm not going to be 40 again. I'm not going to be 50 again. I'm not going to be 60 again. I have to deal with the reality of where my body is and try to maximize what I have at the time. Mm-hmm. And so what happens when you get older is your hair turns gray and your hair falls out, your muscles get weaker, you slow down, right? And that's exactly what happens with sleep. What's called your sleep architecture, the mechanisms and your sleep start to break down. Mm-hmm. Right. And so what happens when you start to get older is you still need, your 7.5 to 9.5 hours of sleep, but you can't get it. Right. Your body's waking you up. And so the way people deal with that is really through napping. Mm-hmm. Right. Because napping is sleep and you can make up a lot of the difference by napping.
Okay. And tell me a little bit, is there a difference between 10, 20, an hour, hour and a half with a nap?
Yeah. I mean, some people are good nappers and some people I'm a bad napper, only because I tend to wake up in a deep sleep. And so what you have to do is set your clock, and then you get groggy and you get what's called sleep inertia, and you feel like crap for a while. Right? And so it kind of discourages me from napping. So what most of the researchers say is, if you think about sleep as a 90-minute cycle, what you want to do is sleep for 15, 20 minutes, or nap for 15 or 20 minutes, so that you don't wake up in a deep sleep.
Got it.
Either that or nap for 90 minutes until you wake up in your, when it rolls back up to your REM sleep and when you're awake again.
I'm glad to hear that, because I found some similar information, or heard some similar information 4 or 5 years ago, and I pride myself in my superpower to be able to fall asleep. And probably for the last 4 years, every day after lunch, I take a 15-minute nap, and it feels so good when I wake up every day from that 15-minute nap. It feels like more of a kick than I get out of coffee. It's surprising.
Yeah, all of the hockey players I've worked with in the last decade, and NBA players, all nap in the afternoon.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, I've found it to be quite the awesome tool, and I push it on my clients, or at least get them to try to test it out, because it seems like as we age, it gives me that opportunity to dip into a little bit of that sleep that I typically average probably 6.5 to 7.5 hours of sleep. So I'm not always on that 7.5 hour marker, but I'm glad to hear that naps are good, and I'm going to continue taking advantage of them.
And one of the ways to figure out when's a good time to nap for you, I mean, aside from just judging it, is you can take your temperature every hour or 2 hours, from when you wake up and you'll graph it, and you'll see a curve. So which matches your circadian rhythm, and also matches your reaction time.
Okay.
So if you know what your own circadian rhythms look like, then you can nap when you're at the lowest.
So when you're at your lowest body temperature, that's when it would be a good time to nap. Okay. Yeah. Is that why I feel like I've heard this before? When you go to bed at night, you want your body temperature to be lower and having your environment a little bit cooler?
Some of that's a bit confusing, because there's a difference between internal body temperature and external, skin temperature. But your internal temperature is largely driven by your circadian rhythms, and so it normally goes down, and you get it cold at night. I mean, that's just normal. But there's also this blip in the afternoon where if you take your temperature or you measure your reaction time, you get this. It's often called what's called a post-lunch dip, where and people used to think that they ate too much past that lunch, when the reality is that's just a normal part of our biology, and it's why a lot of cultures have siestas in the afternoon.
Yeah, I'm all for that. And so now, taking a step back from everything that we've covered today, we've covered the measuring of sleep, the performance that sleep can impact, and some of the things that we're being told that can help us, whether it's putting a pill in our mouth or technology based. What would you recommend if you had a conversation with someone, like I said, who is working all week and still likes to be very active, and they said, okay, I'm having trouble sleeping, where should I start?
Great question. So first thing, we have a conversation about their lifestyle, right? And talk about their biology, and talk about and there's some screening tools you can use to figure out whether you have a sleep disorder or not, right? Or whether you have mental health issues, or whether, if you're on medications, read the bottle. Look at the stuff you're drinking in the can. Does it say caffeine in it? Right? So looking at your own lifestyle in terms of trying to diagnose why you're not sleeping before you kind of jump into solutions, right? And that is probably the Achilles heel of the entire sleep industry, is they're just learning how to do that.
Got it.
And then the other is just sleep hygiene, which is, you can Google it, which basically means your sleep environment.
Okay.
And one of the absolute most critical things that I tell this to everybody that deals with sleep issues is make your room dark.
Mm.
And I'll tell you how dark. Make it dark so that if you hold your hand a foot from your face and you can see your hand, it's not dark enough.
That's awesome. I love this because I've been trying. I'm the biggest. That's one of my biggest pet peeves is trying to get the room as dark as it possibly can. So that's wonderful.
And I'll tell you why. Is because even if your eyes are closed, light can get into your eye and right into your brain. And there's a core group of about 20,000 brain cells that control your circadian rhythms, and they're all triggered by light.
Hmm.
So when it's light out, your body does not make melatonin. And when it's dark out, your body produces melatonin, which makes you sleepy.
Hmm.
And so we're diurnal animals, which means we're biologically programmed to be awake in the daytime, to sleep at night.
Mm-hmm.
And all of that is triggered by light exposure.
Mm. It's fascinating. So I could also imagine that on the flip side, it might be important to get sunlight early in the morning.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Get up. And we do that with shift workers. I worked with a lot of miners in Western Australia in the iron ore mines. And, we tried to get them, they would come off shift in the morning. And we would try to we had to put sunglasses on them and get them into their cabins with the blackout blinds on before the sun came up. Because once the sun came up, their body wasn't producing melatonin and they couldn't get to sleep.
Wow. Wow. So we can we can look if we're struggling with sleep. You said check out your lifestyle first. There's screenings that you can take a look at to try to self-diagnose based on some things, and then the sleep hygiene and environment.
Yeah. So darkness, make sure your bed's comfortable, and a lot of the computers and cell phones put off blue light. And it's actually that blue light frequency that really triggers the melatonin in your brain.
Okay. And
I mean, it inhibits the production of melatonin. So really, probably an hour, 45 minutes before you try to get to sleep, you need to just get off those things. But make sure your room is comfortable. Make sure it's dark and cool enough. Just kind of manage those things. And sometimes there's noise. Yeah. And I think the third thing, in terms of what you can do is, and what I tell athletes is, don't worry about sleep so much. Like, I'm serious. Like, people are so, they monitor their sleep, almost 24/7 and obsess about it. And they're actually staying awake because they're worried about not sleeping. Right.
That's so easy. It's a double-edged sword. It's like, yeah, don't worry about sleep, but I know I need it. So.
Right. And so, but it's much like strength and conditioning, get into a program where strength and conditioning, you do certain exercises every day, certain weightlifting every day at a certain time. Get into a program where you're going to try to go to bed at the same time every night and get up at the same time. Just get into a program and don't obsess about it.
Yeah, I feel like that's my Achilles heel, because I'm an obsessor and I dive into it. Like, I've got my night routine down to almost like the minute of when I'm doing things, which I'm sure helps. But at the same time, I'm sure with a different personality, someone might create anxiety over that and work against them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So lifestyle, create the environment that's cold enough, it's comfortable, it's dark, and then just recognizing that, hey, the body is going to take care of itself. I'm not worrying about breathing all day long.
Exactly.
It's going to do it. That's wonderful. That's great advice. And my curiosity goes to when you said sleep disorders as well. So when you have environment and sleep disorders, in your experience, I'm sure there's not an exact percentage, but when people come to you, where do you see the problem typically existing for those people, or is it a combination of them?
Well, that's fascinating, because it actually is a combination. It's almost rare to find someone who has a single cause of a sleep problem. But the two big poster boys for sleep problems are is sleep apnea and restless leg syndrome. But there are 90 other sleep disorders. Right? And so it's difficult to get those assessed, but usually those are all superimposed on lifestyle issues as well.
Got it.
Or they may be taking medications, or they may have diabetes. So all of these things, and that's what I talked about when I work with athletes, is peeling back the onion, is let's kind of methodically go through and figure out what's actually causing you to have, first of all, let's figure out whether you even have a sleep problem.
Yeah.
But that's an important issue, because there are people out there who swear that they've been up all night and they haven't slept, and yet when they go through polysomnography, they go through the brainwave stuff, they're dead asleep. And so there's this phenomena that affects a certain number of people, where the part of your brain that's telling you you're awake is active, but while your brain is actually still asleep.
Wow.
And so it creates all of this huge amount of anxiety. And once they kind of figured that out, that helps a lot with patients. I mean, they're trying to work with them about that. But so, and self-reported sleep is terrible. So if you ask somebody, well, when did you sleep last night? Well, I went to I think I slept at 10 o'clock and I got up at 8. So I got 10 hours of sleep. They try to do the math. Yeah. And the reality is people wake up a lot in the night, and you need to, if you really want to know whether you have a sleep problem or not, you need to wear a medical grade actigraph for a few days or a week and look at that, because I've worked with athletes that swear they have sleep problems. I'm going, you know what? You actually don't. Right? You're just anxious about it. Right. And there's ones that do. So the first question is, do you have a sleep problem? And then the second is, okay, let's figure out what's causing it.
Got it. I could see how, especially in our culture today, instilling fear of missing out on something that you're now creating a problem that didn't exist in the first place, potentially. And how about that? What is it? The midnight cocktail that helps you fall asleep? Is there any truth behind that?
Yes and no. I mean, it's all things.
Yeah.
Alcohol can actually help you fall asleep faster. But what it does is it really messes up your sleep architecture. So the quality of the sleep you get is terrible.
Okay.
So you're unconscious for 8 hours, but you're not getting 8 hours of sleep.
Got it. Makes a lot of sense. I've loved everything you brought to us today. Super powerful stuff. Help us to understand the sleep a little bit better, so we can have better educated decisions to make. And so do you have any other closing words or recommendations or thoughts you'd like to impart on the audience before we close the conversation?
I don't. I mean, it's very difficult because, looking at sleep research and looking at what's going on in the media around sleep, it's like trying to drink out of a fire hose. Right? And so, people just need to take a step back a little bit and not worry about it so much, and really think consciously about if to figure out whether they're sleeping well or not, and if they're not, figure out what the cause of that is. And as you say, there's often many different causes, and when our book comes out in the spring, we'll do this again. Yeah, no, that would be wonderful. I'm really looking forward to the book. I read your bio, and I thought it was a book that was already out. I was looking for it, and then you told me it's coming out. So I'm really looking forward to it. I think it's going to make a big impact, not only for me and my audience, but the sports world in general. Yeah, I appreciate that. That's what we're trying to do, is help. Yeah, that's awesome. So thank you so much, Pat, for taking the time and speaking with us. And for anybody listening or watching and wants more information, go check out his website, Byrne co.com, and that's BYRNE -co.com, and I'll provide the link where I'm posting this as well. But again, Pat, thank you so much. My pleasure. Thanks, Michael. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you want to continue to become the best rider you can be for as long as possible, make sure you subscribe to my channel. I'm going to continue to put out videos and allowing you to get the most out of your body so you can get the most out of your horse.